Hello and welcome back to Monster Monday. Today is another deadly duo because I'm here with Graham, and we're going to be talking about a monster that he picked out from this book, the Castles and Crusades Monsters and Treasure book.
I spent hours going over this, scanning it for all kinds of great monsters, and after all that research, I picked the Violet Fungus. Bill, are you familiar with the Violet Fungus?
No, but we're about to be familiar with it. Okay, so Graham found the Violet Fungus in this book. Let's talk a little bit about plant monsters, because you were right. People don't use enough plant monsters, and they're pretty cool, and you could put them in a lot of different places.
I feel like the default for plant monsters is we're in a dungeon, you're in these caves, and we're just gonna drop in some weird plants, and then you just roll for initiative, or like, ooh, is this plant dangerous or not? Surprise it is, roll initiative.
Yes, and to that point, that is the easiest way to use any plant monster, or the Violet Fungus specifically, in any encounter, right? Like, they're not just, if a book says that you can only find them in swamps, take that as a suggestion. It's not the absolute rule. You could put these things pretty much anywhere.
Right, especially if you're willing to reskin it. So we're talking about a fungus today, but if you need to make it an ivy plant so that it fits in a swamp, you could do that too.
Right, and you could even be in an Arctic campaign where the characters are in an ice cave and you see a crystalline structure that you think is some kind of ice or mineral deposit, and that could actually be a sentient plant creature that has taken on a external exoskeleton of icy crystals and frost, but is alive and ready to attack you.
Icy plants, really good way to subvert expectations.
Yes.
Because we don't think of plants as growing in, you know, the tundra or the glacier. So.
Not to mention they would have a higher armor class. Because ice.
Right.
All right,
let's talk about the monster a little bit. So it says the Violet Fungus are large organisms that grow low to the ground. They consist of hundreds of tiny mushrooms. They have from 1 to 4 tentacles that stretch out from the center of the creature's mass that help it move and attack. It's capable of very limited movement, but the foul tentacles can deliver a corrosive touch. Violet fungi are typically found growing amidst a patch of screechers. So they're already tying it into another monster.
Yes, which we love, because
are you familiar with the screechers, Bill?
Yeah, and I could think, you know, certainly in any setting, you could combo this with other things so that the party's attention is drawn to the other things versus, you know, here's an example, right? If you have a treasure chest in the middle of the room and it looks very tempting, an experienced party might be tempted to metagame and assume that that treasure chest is a mimic.
Correct. But
then you have little colorful mushrooms in your cave in the Underdark or your dungeon, wherever you're setting this adventure, and little mushrooms that are actually mushrooms and not part of this at all throughout the place. And the players, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're playing 5e and they're like, can I make a nature check? Sure, go ahead. Oh, these are subterranean mushrooms. They're pretty normal. Or these are Underdark mushrooms and they're phosphorescent and they glow blue. And you could even make them minor treasure. You could be like, you know, an apothecary uses these mushrooms and distills them into a potion of remove blah, blah, blah.
Very rare and valuable.
So this gets the party comfortable.
Yeah.
And then when you're ready to drop the Violet Fungus on them, they will not be ready for the tentacles that lash out from the piles of mushrooms.
That's right. The best way to surprise someone is to set a pattern in one direction and then you break that pattern.
When you think about it, sometimes being a GM is medium deceptive and evil. And I'm here for that.
Well, that's what makes it interesting, right?
Yes.
That's the ride that you want to get on as a player.
Yes. Make some mystery in all of your games.
So let me talk about the combat options for the Violet Fungus. Violet fungi do not actively seek victims, but curious adventurers and monsters often find that interesting looking plants are deadly. That's kind of what we're talking about. The fungus waits for its prey to approach, then strikes with 1 or more of its tentacles until the victim falls to the fungus's deadly poison. Nice! After the victim succumbs, the fungus will drag itself over to the body to feed upon it for many days. Let's talk a little bit about that poison as it's stated out in the book.
This is, again, another example of why Castles and Crusades is a little more hardcore than 5e.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
A successful attack with the tentacle exposes the victim to an acid-based rotting poison. In addition to the 1d4 damage from the caustic touch, the victim must make a Constitution saving throw, or the poison begins to rot their flesh, and they suffer 1 point of incurable hit point damage every turn until death. Nice. During this time, the pain causes the victim to suffer a -2 penalty to everything. Delay poison will delay the poison's effects, while remove disease, neutralize poison, cure critical wounds, or more powerful healing spells will remove it entirely.
Though, not the damage, which may thereafter be cured normally. So, here's an
There's
example.
a little healing puzzle with that, which is neat.
Right, because it's a poison, but it's a poison that acts in the same fashion as like a necrotic disease, like a flesh-eating virus kind of thing.
It's like it's a poison ivy on steroids.
Right. So you can cure it with those things, but ouch. That also, here's the other thing. That penalty, that -2 to everything, to actions and checks, is huge.
It's massive.
It's huge.
That's checks. Would you count saves as part of this? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So now they're getting worse at whatever else you've combined in that encounter. Maybe there's like a slippery, rocky slope that goes down to a chasm, and they have to make balance checks across. Surprise, poison mushrooms. Now they're going to be worse at just running across the chasm. So do you deal with the mushrooms, or do you risk it for the biscuit and try to run your way across?
Yes, precisely. And I mean, here's a point. The players in this with this monster have to encounter it.
Right.
That means it's kind of a lair-based monster.
Sure.
So once you use it, they're probably going to assume that that's the last time they're going to encounter one of these, which may or may not be true depending on how you design your dungeon, your adventure.
Right.
But you could use it again in a different environment that they're not expecting to encounter it, like outdoors in a swamp.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Exactly.
So as we talked about that reskinning or scaling it, if they're lower level, making it less deadly is okay, or upscaling it if they're higher level.
Yeah, exactly. So the last bit that it's got in the book here is that the castle keeper may optionally rule that a limb was struck, and if the limb is removed in time, the rot is stopped entirely. Of course, then the limb is lost.
Yes.
So I like that they have a little clause for just cutting off an
Which is a
appendage
little
there.
bit like zombie lore. If you get bit in the arm or the leg and you cut off a limb and tourniquet, you could stop it before it advances.
Right.
That is totally valid.
And then, now that character is going to go through an arc where they're missing an arm and they've got penalties to things, or they don't get their shield anymore, or whatever those penalties might look like. And then in the next arc, of course, you meet the artificer that's going to make you some sort of gear-based robot arm, and that's going to be rad.
Oh my God, it's Ash from Evil Dead.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Or it creates a side quest where they have to find this, this monastic cleric who has the ability to cast regeneration.
Right.
Something that then pivots, but always make it into something adventure worthy.
Right. We've talked a little bit about how to set up encounters with this. I think there's some interesting other elements you can add in. I brought up the balance thing earlier, or tying it around the chest. And is the chest a mimic? Is what's dangerous in this room that's full of mushrooms and this chest, right? On top of that, I think, particularly if you're doing grid-based, not theater of the mind combat, there's tentacles involved. You could scale up this monster to grapple, right?
Yep.
And now, you've got this sort of immobilizing effect. Well, what do you pair that with? I don't know, maybe the room's got traps, poison darts kind of things, or otherwise they're trying to get from point A to B is sort of the objective, but these things are slowing them down, and the more they're slowed down, the more they get hit by these tentacles. I think you could do some interesting stuff.
I love that idea. You could even have lesser violet fungi whose tentacles don't do the poison necrotic death damage, but just grapple. So you've created difficult terrain.
Yeah.
They're getting grappled, and then the one or two violet fungi make their way over to the grappled people.
Right, exactly.
So here's a question. If you were going to build this into a multi-adventure or even campaign setting, I would ask the question, where do these come from?
Yes. I think
they're not naturally occurring because, they list as a type plant, but in a fantasy RPG setting, where would these sentient plants come from?
It's a really great question, and you can always answer that with the bad guy put them there, obviously, because he's some sort of strange dungeon architect, and that's what he or she likes to do.
Right.
But I think it might be more interesting if they are a side effect. So if the villain is this sorceress who's trying to, build a bridge to another plane,
Yes.
or something like that, and then the portals that she's creating leak out this arcane energy that's distorting the natural fungus and creates these things.
Yes.
That could be one way that you
Because
do that.
then that ties the encounter into an adventure and then ultimately into a campaign arc.
Right,
One
right.
of the campaign arcs.
And that's what makes this interesting, is that not only is it a new, unique creature that no one's ever heard of because it's a side effect of this one specific instance, but it's also acting as a clue. What's going on here? This
Yes.
is strange. I brought, after this encounter, I brought back a sample to the local apothecary, and she didn't know what it was. She'd never heard of it. And so now we know that there's something weird. There's
Yes.
something amiss.
Yes, and that adds mystery.
Right.
It adds a hook for a greater campaign plot line
Right.
that could be explored. And then as they continue to go on these adventures and encounter more of these things in these different locations, you drop in more clues about why the sorceress is trying to open up these portals.
Right.
And you can integrate other sort of otherworldly aberrations
Yeah.
into these different settings. And ultimately, whatever you decide to build would lead the higher level party to really getting into the meat and potatoes of this dangerous sorceress who's experimenting with otherworldly,
Right.
extraplanar stuff, and is basically infecting, their world
Yeah.
with all these aberrations.
Yeah. You could also use this as sort of an allegory for like the classic Fern Gully Avatar style, like nature is precious, we need to protect it, and doing selfish things can corrupt it,
Yes.
right? And so you can involve like a sort of a blighted druid, fallen druid kind of storyline. That would be a really good villain.
Yes.
As a side effect of whatever powerful magics that person's doing. And I do really like this as a recurring element as well, because the first time you encounter it, you're low level, and it's just that one encounter. Maybe it's got a special objective, but otherwise, like, you just kind of encounter it.
If you
And then
want
fast forward a couple sessions, now it's back again, but it's in the middle of what is otherwise like a boss fight, and so now it's this added element. And then when you get to the villain's lair, these things are all over the place, but they're higher level. And so now you've had to scale this up where maybe the damage or the poison doesn't increase mechanically, but you added in these immobilizing effects, or maybe the chance, like their grapple checks are more effective, the
Yeah.
fungus is. So now that's the harder challenge, is more the immobilize rather than the damage.
Yes, and I think at all of those phases, you can change it up. So maybe it's not the poison effect. Maybe in one encounter, it is a paralysis effect.
Yeah.
Maybe in another encounter, it is literally just a biological disease, right?
Right.
Like a parasite that's transmitted. Maybe it's more necrotic in nature, and then there's zombies and other undead that surround the mushroom.
Yeah. We're starting to get into beholder style, where there's different like eye stalks that do different lasers. Similarly, there's different strains of these violet funguses. Maybe they have different colors, so you reskin it, and so there's a scarlet fungus, and there's a
Yes.
mauve fungus, a chartreuse fungus,
Yes.
if you will.
And they could even have some where there's spores that let out like a neurotoxin.
There you
so
go.
instead of paralysis, they're like basically starting to hallucinate, right?
Yeah.
And that hallucination adventures are always fun, because then the players are like, I don't know what's real and what's not real, right? And then they just wake up in like
Right.
the gutter of a city.
Right.
Where am I?
What's cool about all of that too is that we're doing a lot of things that are based off of the Constitution save, right? Where typically, if you don't know what's real or not, well, that's going to be an illusion. So that's going to be more of like your wisdom saving throw, or the classic dex save against physical damage. So
Yes.
now you're finding different ways to push your party and make the people that have really good Constitution feel really cool, and also threaten the people that otherwise are not threatened because they're a rogue with high wisdom, and so now they make saves really consistently. Well,
Yes.
now I'm going to push you in your Constitution, which is rip. It's a 10.
Right.
So
Right. And that reskinning, that adjusting, that upscaling or downscaling all allows for you to use this very flexible monster that Graham picked out for this episode. So we hope that you have enjoyed this, that you found it informative. If you have encountered these or used them in your games, please post in the comments and let us know how you encountered them or used them as a keeper or GM. And as always, thank you to the patrons and the subscribers for your support, and we will see you on the next episode of Monster Monday. Peace out.
What's up, Violent Fungus?
Okay.
That was the cut to the
dope intro that Ethan made in like 20 minutes.
Dude.
Well, hello, and welcome to Bill Allen World. I am Wizzy, the Wizard. I'm back once again to remind you to subscribe and click on the notifications button, and also watch videos that are over there. Tune in to the next episode of whatever show you are just watching and watch other shows featuring Bill. He made me say that because he's a narcissist. Okay, bye.